All right, Vel, welcome, welcome, welcome. And so I hope everybody's doing well. Everybody is safe. That is important. And if you are got any ice like we did here in Missouri, I hope you are warm. Anyway, one of the things we're not one of the things, the thing we're going to talk about tonight is, and we've talked a little bit about it in the past, but it is how to, kind of make connections and, you know, um, get human resources to take action if you are um, reporting to them or talking to them, right? So I think that's important. One of the things I think, um, you know, I used to go back and forth with one of my friends about this is whether or not, HR is really on your side. Are they really there for you, or are they really there for the organization? And that becomes one of the problems is that, you often don't know whose side they're on. And I think it's a fair and safe assumption to say that they are not on your side, right? And so I think whenever you're going in to speak with, HR, the assumption should be that, they don't have your back, okay? And I think that's important. Um, the other thing I think too is, a lot of times HR also are being bullied. Okay, so again, if it would, which makes sense, if you're being bullied, and the people that they, the other people in the organization, they're kind of the go-to person if you have a problem with somebody. So their office space can become like a revolving door for people who have complaints. That means bullies, that means recipients of bullies, that means bystanders. And if somebody is bullying you, the likelihood that they're mistreating HR is pretty is damn near guaranteed. Okay. However, HR can also be bullies themselves. Okay. They're just like everybody else. They can be bullied and they can be bullies, but their job still is to carry out the policies and procedures in an objective fashion that organizations have. Now, one of the problems that HR has is there are very few policies and procedures around workplace bullying. So, one of the things that they often do is pick something that is close, and that's often so they pick what's close and what they have available, and that is often conflict resolution or mediation. And both of those, again, mediation, conflict resolution, are ineffective when it comes to dealing with workplace bullying. Okay, so but that they use what they have, they use what they're comfortable with, and that is generally those kinds of things. Okay, um, so if you're, again, I've talked about, approaching HR. I think a good policy for you when it comes to HR is to do your research on who they have relationship with, how those relationships are, if there's toxicity in some of those relationships, and that kind of thing. And I also think that a good rule of thumb is that to proceed with caution and to proceed with HR as if, um, you know, just that, that it's going to be dicey for you to be in there and make complaints and make allegations of workplace bullying. I think that's fair. Okay. And the other thing I think too is, so do your research, know what the relationships are, who they have good relationships with, who they have maybe shaky relationships with. that's just good practice, so you kind of know if you're complaining about somebody who they have a great relationship with, it's going to be more problematic for you than if it's somebody that, maybe also has caused them a lot of hassle as well. Okay. Um, so the first thing, you have to learn and speak kind of the language of human resources. Okay, because their position is, again, to carry out policies and procedures. They're there to protect the organization. They're there to make sure that, all of the wheels in the organization are turning, and they're turning in a way that is beneficial for the organization and their boss. Okay, so um, so use terms like policy and procedure, liability, risk, all of those kinds of words that HR connects with, that are on their radar. So you want to use their lingo. You want to speak their language, because that's the language that they understand. And that's just good practice when it comes to dealing with anybody who is, from a different background or that kind of thing, learning how to speak their language. So, like, you know, I speak social work, okay? I speak that language. And so, if you don't come from that background, you're not necessarily familiar with HR lingo and language, and I would become familiar as you're approaching them, okay? The other thing I think that is really, really, really important when you're approaching HR is always to understand that it's very likely, when you're making complaints about workplace bullying or problems in the organization, maybe that's conflict or toxicity or whatever it is, to assume that they already probably have a significant amount of information about you as well. When it comes to workplace bullying, bullies make a concerted effort to get to know HR so that they can they're making complaints about you, but they're also building relationships. Okay, so what I've talked about before is that, I think you ought to build relationships with HR and start small, and just around small talk and that kind of thing, if that makes sense. Um, and I think that's important. And I think one of the things that happens when you get into a bullying situation, you see a lot of people as the enemy and in cahoots with the bully, and you're probably not wrong with that. But you still have to build relationships with people, especially those people who are going to be making decisions, who you're going to need, and that kind of thing. Okay, so the first thing, do speak the language of human resources. So get to know their lingo. I think that's super, super important, because you want them to key in on things like liability and, not following policy and procedure, and impact on the organization. Okay, lack of loss of resources, or things like that they talk about. The other thing I think is really important is, generally, organizations, depending on the size of the organization that you're working in, they have policies and procedures that they're following. Okay, for example, most places don't have like professional development or things like that, but there's conflict, right? Look at the mission and values, okay? Because one of the things that HR is really big into is carrying out the missions and values of their organization. Okay, a couple of years ago, I went to a local meeting here in Missouri, and really had an eye-opening experience based, because it was HR was presenting, and they kept talking about the mission and the values of the organization, and so they pride themselves on being the bearers of the mission and values of the organization. So as you're talking to them and you're weaving things into using their lingo, you also want to talk about how the behavior that you're seeing in the organization and you're experiencing is not um, representative of the mission and the values of the organization. So make sure you know the mission, make sure you know the values, and then how you can weave in how this bullying behavior is really in contradiction with those mission and values. But let's say, for example, and you want to, so when it comes to policies and procedures, you want to show the discrepancy between the policy that they have and how the policy is being carried out. So let's say, for example, there is a promotion policy, okay? And you don't get promoted, but somebody with very similar background gets promoted, okay? You can then say, well, we have this, right? We have this policy on promotion, which states criteria A, criteria B, criteria C. Okay, again, and I understand that I didn't get promoted, but one of the things I'd like to do is just to go over how I met the criteria, ABC, okay, here's how I met it, here's the documentation, here's my artifacts and evidence, and I know that also that this has not been applied objectively across the board. Okay, now you got to be a little bit careful when you say, and you didn't hold, you promoted Bob and he doesn't meet any of the criteria, and I meet all the criteria and you didn't promote me. Okay, that's essentially what you want to say, but how you say it makes a difference. So you really have to think about, again, how you can weave in the mission and values and the HR language and lingo into making that point, okay? Because you also, when you approach HR, you want to make sure that you're approaching them in a way that raises your credibility, that gets them to see you in a different light. You're not the troublemaker, you're not the problem in the organization. You're the one who's trying to shine a light on this problem, okay, where there's a discrepancy about how people are being treated, okay? And, now you may or may not agree with this, but I don't think that the language of bullying is always necessarily something that needs to be brought up in the conversation. Right? Because it's not about the term bullying. It's about you showing HR that the problem, which is bullying, the impact that that's having on the organization and everyone in it, including you. Okay, so it's not about necessarily the lingo. It's not about the word bullying. It's about showing how that behavior and what it is doing for the organization, okay? And so again, you have to approach them in a way that you think they will best hear you and you're able to get your point across, okay? And that does require you to do a little bit of research in how they have handled and managed these things before, okay? So if you know that there was another person in your organization who was bullied before you got there, who reported to HR and nothing happened, that's a sign to you that, there may be resistance. Okay, there may be resistance to what it is that you're going to bring to the table. Okay. I think the third thing that's super, super, super important, probably the most important thing to do when you're going to talk to HR, is you have to know exactly what it is you'd like them to do, okay? Because I generally think that HR often just doesn't know what to do, okay? Especially if your boss, who happens to be their boss, is the bully, okay? It might be very difficult for them to get that person to stop bullying, okay? Which is ultimately going to be a massive disappointment for you, which I get. But you know, you can ask for certain solutions that might be actually doable for HR, okay? And that comes in the way of things like policy and procedures for meetings, policy and procedure around email, policy and procedure around using things like Slack or Teams, okay? And so for you, when you go in and approach HR, you need to have the solutions that you want to see. And best practice would be to say, have have solutions that have some that HR has some ability to carry out and do. Okay, so if you go in and you say, well, I want Bob, I want Bob to be fired, and I want Bob out of this organization because Bob is just a huge, you know what, and Bob's a bully. HR doesn't have the power to do that. Okay? So, again, understanding what their role is and the limitations of their role and how much power they have makes a difference in what you're going to ask. Because if Bob is the boss, guess what? Bob is also the boss of HR. Bob can fire HR too. So they're probably not going to go in and say, Bob, stop bullying. On the other hand, they might be able to get a policy through, right? Um, Bob, right, around email, okay? And so there may be some things that HR has the ability to do. The other thing we have to really understand is a lot of times HR just does not have the power and or capability to stop the bullying, okay? And that's why, again, you need a multifaceted approach to dealing with bullying. Just reporting it's not going to cut it, okay? Um, there just are lots of other things that you can and should be doing to gain support and momentum when it comes to dealing with bullying, rather than just, again, putting all your eggs in one basket. So, and I think that's really important to understand, because there are a lot of things that, you can do to minimize the trauma, at the same time work and help and support HR to try to bring about some change. And also you can develop relationships with bystanders to try to bring about change. So there's a multifaceted approach that is better than um, that is not necessary. Yes, I think it's better, that multifaceted approach, because you're more likely to get relief and bring about long-term change, which is what you want to do. Now, I just want to bring up one additional point, only because I was on LinkedIn and I read somebody's comment, and I think it's relevant to our conversation when it comes to workplace bullying. And I touched on it in just a minute ago. Again, it's, first off, you have to understand when you go to HR what your goal is, okay? Is your goal to get HR to say to you, bullying is happening, you're being bullied? Is that your goal? Okay. Is your goal to call out the bully? Do you want HR to say, yes, Bob is a bully? Okay, or do you want to bring around change where maybe there isn't there are policies and procedures in place that make it harder for Bob to bully. Okay, if that makes sense. Okay, and so when you're going into HR, you have to ask yourself that question. Ask and answer, what is my goal? Okay, what is the goal of going in there? Because if your goal is just to get HR to say you're being bullied, that's totally different than if you want them to enact a policy around email use to minimize cyberbullying. Okay. So the comment that I read on LinkedIn was basically like, you need to call the behavior out. Okay. Right. Basically saying, if it's gaslighting, you call it gaslighting. If it's, cyberbullying, you call it cyberbullying, and that kind of thing. And that certainly has a place, okay, to call the behavior out, okay. However, I think when you are being bullied and you're the victim of bullying, all of those things that are happening to you, like gaslighting and cyberbullying, and the name calling and the rumors, all of those things compiled collectively are very, very, very hurtful. Okay, we just can't. I mean, it's just painful. Those things are painful when they are happening to you in your organization. Okay, I understand that. I mean, I myself have been there for a long time, unfortunately. Okay, I was there. Okay. But what happens again when you go into HR and you've reported this maybe more than once, okay, and you're coming in and you're saying, Bob is doing this to me, and Bob is doing that, Bob is cyberbullying me, Bob is gaslighting me, and you get caught up in calling out the behavior, you're losing credibility with human resources because they get tired of hearing those same things over and over and over. They know that you're being gaslit by Bob. They know that you're being cyberbullied by Bob. Okay. I think it's important, at some point, I think there is some relevance in calling out those behaviors. Okay. I think, however, what supervisors and leaders and human resources care about is the impact those behaviors are having on the organization, the everyone in the organization, yourself, the workers, their clients, the reputation. If you're just calling out the behavior and you're not making the connection to the damage and destruction that that's doing in the organization, then I think that there's oftentimes what happens is we're not making the connection between the behavior and the destruction of the organization. So, for example, you could say something like this, right? We have had very, very difficult team meetings, and this has been a pattern that we've had happen for the last 6 months. And in the course of the 2 years that I've been here, we've had high turnover in my department, partially because of those hostile and difficult team meetings. And so we have high turnover, which HR I know makes your job very difficult, because then you're having to hire and retrain and rehire and retrain people who have repeatedly come into this organization and then left. And I think this toxicity in these meetings is leading to that. And here's the evidence that I have for that, right? Here's my documentation, here's my artifacts and evidence. And so you want to call out the behavior if that's important to you, right? But if you're not talking about the destruction and damage it's doing to the organization and the reputation and the clients and the loss of profit, right? Which that's what I'm not saying people don't care about you at work. What I'm saying is those are the things your boss, the CEO, HR cares about. And so when you're going in there, you have to make the case that bullying isn't just affecting you, but what it's doing is destroying the organization. And there's a lot of evidence that in organizations, because there just is a lot of evidence, high turnover, absenteeism, toxic meetings, I could talk about academics and talk about how faculty don't want to show up to their office hours, how they're not even showing up to their office hours, so they're not on campus, and so students can't come and see them, and so then students and faculty can't build relationships, and then students don't get what they need, and they don't like that, and they transfer out, right? There's all these sort of intricate connections between what your organization's mission is and what they're doing, and how bullying is destroying that. Okay, if you have bullying in your organization, you have a toxic organizational culture, that it is affecting everything and everyone in the organization. And if you're reporting it, making those connections really, really can help. And so I think it's, again, when you're going into HR, you really have to speak their lingo, bring in policy and show the discrepancies in policy, and then also make those connections between how it's destroying the organizations, those connections to the larger organization. And I think that's really important. Again, if you need help with reporting, you can go to stopbullyculture /shop, and I have just a video and a workbook that helps you make your case. It helps you shows you how you can get your documentation in order and all of those kinds of things. And so I'd highly recommend that you get that. And also, one of the things that I also do is coaching. So if you're wanting to make a report and you're wanting to go in, one of the things I can do is work with you to help you make sure your documentation is well organized, making sure it's in a fashion that an orderly fashion that's better for oftentimes for HR. Make sure you have those artifacts, and then help you be able to present your case in a way that will help you. And you can either message me here, or you can just message me at jan@stopbullyculture.com. Anyway, I think that is it for the evening. If there's anything I can do for you, as always, let me know. If you haven't been to my shop at stopbullyculture.com, I highly, highly recommend it. There's a lot of great stuff there. And I will see you next